Good day, class. I hope yesterday you benefited from what we did. So we'll continue from where we stopped yesterday. You realize that yesterday we, in the Annex 6 of the regulation, we talked about the certificate of vaccination. So those who have traveled before, or even if you haven't traveled and you've taken the yellow fever vaccine, I hope you have this card. So this is what the Annex 6 was talking about. So this is your proof of vaccination. And then anybody who is traveling from an endemic area where you have certain kind of diseases, you are supposed to have this certificate. So this is the certificate for vaccination. And this is the international one. So this one is internationally accepted. And that is what the Annex 6 and then the Annex 7 of the regulation talks about. So anybody traveling from an endemic area, especially where you have the yellow fever disease, you are supposed to take the inoculation. And then this is your proof that you have taken the vaccination. And anywhere that you present it, you'll be allowed entry. So this is the international one. There's another one here, and this is the local. This one is from Ministry of Health. So this one you can use it only within Ghana. You can't travel with it. But here, the international one is accepted. And all that we talked about in the Annex 6 is inclusive in this card. And then you realize that when you look at it, you open here, and then you have a place that you indicate the type of vaccine that you take. You have the batch number, you have the center, the stamp of the center, and then the supervising clinician signature. So this is what I was talking about yesterday in the Annex 6. So this is the sample is what we discussed yesterday. So let's move on to the Annex 7 of the regulation. The Annex 7 talks about the requirements concerning vaccination or prophylaxis for specific diseases. And then it's according to the regulation, in addition to any recommendation concerning vaccination or prophylaxis, the following diseases are those specifically designated under this regulation for which proof of vaccination or prophylaxis may be required for travelers as a condition of entry to a state party. So this is a follow-up of the Annex 6. And like I was saying, yellow fever is one of the requirement, disease condition by which you need the vaccination, and then you need to prove whenever you are traveling. The vaccination against yellow fever. Recommendations and requirements for vaccination against yellow fever for the purpose of this annex are the incubation period for yellow fever is 6 days. So it means that if you contract the yellow fever disease, it will start showing in 6 days. Before 6 days, you will not see any signs and symptoms. It's from 6 days going, that is when the signs and symptoms will be showing. In the same way, when we look at the COVID 2019, you realize that they are saying that the incubation period is 3 weeks. So it's from 3 weeks going that you start seeing the signs and symptoms. So in the same way, the yellow fever disease, it will start showing in 6 days. And then the yellow fever vaccine approved by WHO provide protection against infection starting 10 days following the administration of the vaccine. We are saying that it will start showing in 6 days. So when you take the vaccine, but the vaccine will start working 10 days after you have taken it. So if you are to take the vaccine today, from today to 10 days, you will still not be protected. But from 10 days going, that is when the protection starts. So this is what this subsection is talking about. And then the protection continues. Initially, it was for 10 years. So when you take the vaccine, you are protected from the disease for 10 years. But since 2016, they have realized that they've come out or reviewed the vaccine, and the new vaccine is supposed to protect you for life. So now it's no longer 10 years. When you take it, it's for life. And the validity of a certificate of vaccination against yellow fever shall extend for a period of 10 years. So now, as I was saying, it's no longer 10 years. The validity is for life. So when you take it, you take the yellow fever vaccine today, it will start working in 10 days. And it's supposed to protect you for the rest of your life. There's no need for any revaccination. But before 2016, when you take it, after 10 years, you have to take it again. But for now, it's for life. It's supposed to protect you for life. And a vaccination against yellow fever may be required of any traveler living an area where the organization is WHO, has determined that a risk of yellow fever transmission is present. So you need to take the vaccination if you are from an area where the risk of transmission is there, an endemic area. Those of us in Africa, Africa is an endemic area. The risk of yellow fever is present in Africa. So wherever you go, you will need to prove that you've taken the vaccination. And then your proof is by the yellow card. If a traveler is in possession of a certificate of vaccination against yellow fever, which is not yet valid, the traveler may be permitted to depart, but the provision of paragraph 2H of this annex may be applied. You realize that I mentioned the fact that the vaccination starts working in 10 days after taking it. So in case you are traveling, you take the vaccine today, but maybe tomorrow you have to travel. Wherever you get to, when you show the card, even though the 10 days has not expired, they should allow you to go because you've taken it, depending on the number of days you will spend in that country. Once you have a proof that you've taken it, even though the valid date is not yet due, they are supposed to allow you entry into any country where you present the certificate. Then a traveler in possession of a valid certificate of vaccination against yellow fever shall not be treated as suspect, even if coming from an endemic area where the organization has determined that the risk of yellow fever transmission is present. Once you present the yellow card, they cannot classify you as a suspect, even though you are coming from an area where the risk of yellow fever is present. But once you have the card, it means that you've been protected. You've taken the vaccine, so you are protected, and then you should be allowed to go. And I'm sure the same way, if they are able to develop the vaccine for COVID-19, I'm sure that is what will happen. Wherever you are going, you may need to show a proof, or you have to prove that you've taken the vaccine. So those who are campaigning that the white want to get rid of the black or Africans, that is why they want to bring the vaccine. We have to look at it carefully because this pandemic is internationally. The whole wide world is affected. So a time will come that if you don't prove that you have taken vaccine or you are protected, you will not be allowed entry into any country. Then in accordance with paragraph 1 of Annex 6, the yellow fever vaccine use must be approved by the organization or WHO. So every vaccine that is given, it has to be approved by WHO. You can't say that, example, in Ghana, the Ministry of Health has approved it, or the Ghana Health Service has approved it. It has to be approved by the WHO. State parties shall designate specific yellow fever vaccine centers within their territories in order to ensure quality safety of the procedure and the materials are employed. So every country is supposed to designate or earmark centers where you can go and take the yellow fever vaccine. in Ghana here, especially in Accra, I know that I think Kolebu Public Health Directorate, I think one center is there. 37 also has a center. And then Adabraka Polyclinic also has a center where you can take the vaccine. I don't know, they were thinking of opening a center at Kotoka International Airport, but I don't know whether that has been done. So these are the centers in Ghana where you can take the yellow fever vaccine. Then every person employed at a point of entry in an area where the organization has determined that a risk of yellow fever transmission is present, and every member of the crew of a conveyance using any such point of entry shall be in possession of a valid certificate. So if you are working in an airport, you are working in a ship, you are working in an aircraft, or you are working on a bus that embark on international journey or travel, you need to take the yellow fever vaccine. And then you have to be in possession of the certificate, which is the yellow card. Without that, you will not be allowed to work wherever in these areas that I mentioned. Then a state party in whose territory vectors of yellow fever are present may require a traveler from an area where the organization has determined that a risk of yellow fever transmission is present, who is unable to produce a valid certificate of vaccination against the yellow fever to be quarantined until the certificate becomes valid. A state party in whose territory vectors of yellow fever are present may require a traveler from an area where the organization has determined that a risk of yellow fever transmission is present, who is unable to produce a valid certificate of vaccination. So in countries where yellow fever transmission is present or is endemic, and then another person is also coming to that country, and wherever that traveler is coming from is also an endemic area. So when you get to your final destination, they are supposed to request, or you have to show them the proof of your vaccination. But if you are not able to prove, then you have to be quarantined. That is what the International Health Regulation says. You have to be quarantined until the certificate becomes valid. So you realize that initially I said the validity of the certificate is for 10 days. So supposing you've taken it and that 10 days has not expired, it means that your card is not valid. So that is what they are saying here. You should be allowed to enter the country, and then they have to quarantine you. So your vaccine or vaccination becomes valid. Other than that, they shouldn't allow you to go to wherever you are going. And then they are not supposed to also keep you until more than 6 days from the date of your last possible exposure to infection. So that is what the regulation is saying. So you realize that if you don't have it, you will not be allowed to travel. Yesterday I shared my experience. I think in 2014, we were supposed to go to Kenya. 4 of us were going to Kenya. And then I know I have it, but not knowing the card I took was this one, the local one, because my initial international one expired. So when I went to renew it, what they gave me when I came, I didn't even bother to find out where it is. So when I was going, I just picked, because it's yellow, so I just picked the card. But when I got to Kotoka, then they said, no, this is for Ghana, Ministry of Health Ghana. You can't travel with it. So the 4 of us, only one had a valid card. And they almost denied the 3 of us. Kenya Airline didn't even want us to board. We had to rush to 37 to go and amend it. I had taken it. I did not have the appropriate card, but I knew the batch number, so they just transferred it into the international one, which is this one. And then the other two were forced to take the vaccine in that night before we're allowed to travel to Kenya. So that is it. If you don't have it, you cannot travel. Even some of the airlines will not even allow you to board. And then travelers who possess an exemption from yellow fever vaccination, signed by an authorized medical officer or an authorized health worker, may nevertheless be allowed entry, subject to the provision of the foregoing paragraph of this annex, and to being provided with information regarding protection from yellow fever. Yesterday, I mentioned the fact that some people react or may react to the yellow fever vaccine. So if it's a contraindicated for you, then the clinician can exempt you, because if they're giving it to you becomes detrimental to your health, then it means that you cannot take it. So the clinician will have to give you a written notice that shows that you cannot take the vaccine. And wherever you present that notice, then they have to allow you entry. So that is what this section is talking about. Should the traveler not be quarantined, they may be required to report any feverish or other symptoms to the competent authority and be placed under surveillance. So we are saying that if you are not able to, or if you don't have a valid certificate, they should allow you to enter, or they will have to quarantine you. And then in the quarantine, then they have to, wherever you go, you have to report to the competent authorities. If you notice any feverish condition, fever is one of the symptoms of yellow fever, or any other symptoms of the yellow fever, you have to report to the competent authorities wherever you are, and then they will place you under surveillance. And I know you know what surveillance is all about. So that is it for the Annex 7. Then Article 32, treatment of travelers. In implementing health measures under this regulation, state parties shall treat travelers with respect for their dignity, human rights, and then fundamental freedoms, and minimize any discomfort or distress associated with such measures. So we are talking about preventing international transmission of diseases. And then, so it involves people traveling, goods and services moving across borders. And then in that, you have to know how to even treat travelers. How do you treat travelers? We are preventing infection, international spread of infection. For example, this COVID. And then initially, when we had not closed the borders, even though the infection or the pandemic was in vogue, people were coming in and leaving our airports and then our borders. How do we treat them? So this is what this section is talking about. So whenever you are implementing the regulation, you think about people's right. You have to treat travelers with respect. Respect anybody. It doesn't matter where the person is coming from. And then you have to also take in consideration that dignity. Everybody has a dignity. And then everybody has a right, human right, and then fundamental freedoms will have to also be minimized. You don't need to trample upon people's freedom or human right. And then you also need to avoid discomfort. I think during the Ebola, this is an example. During the Ebola, there were some Ghanaian students. I think they were going to Ukraine. They came for holidays and they were supposed to go back to Ukraine to continue their studies. So when they got to the airport, I think when they got to Ukraine airport, then one of them was having a runny nose. And then you realize that at that time, runny nose was also a sign of, or a symptom of Ebola. And then they are also coming from Africa, West Africa. And the Ebola was happening or occurring in West Africa. So they suspected them of having Ebola, and they have to isolate all of them. And that person who was having the running stomach was put on a trolley. You know what we use trolley for. And they covered him with black polythene all over. And somebody was wheeling him in between two sniffing dogs. And this was shown on BBC, CNN, for the whole world to see. So this is what we are talking about. Even though you suspect the person, you don't treat human beings like that. How do you put a human being on a trolley? And then you cover the person with black polythene. That black polythene that they use to collect, to line the bins. So these are some of the things. In implementing the regulation, you have to make sure that you don't discriminate and then you respect people's rights. And these are some of the things that we are talking about. You treat all travelers with courtesy and respect. I may be looking very tattered or coming from a poor country, but you have to treat me with courtesy. Then taking into consideration the gender, sociocultural, ethnic, or religious concern of travelers. You have to consider the gender of the person, the traveler. If you need to interview me or collect data from me, some of the questionings may be very personal. So you don't go and bring a gentleman to come and then treat or come and search me or a female. At times, you have to even remove your dress and all those things. So that is what we are talking about. You consider the gender of the traveler. Then you also look at the socio-cultural background of the person. In some societies, certain things are not accepted. Certain things are also accepted. So you look at the person's cultural background and then religious background. If you see me and I've covered my face, you don't tell me to remove it because it's accepted in my culture and it's accepted based on my religion. If it's not accepted in your religion, it doesn't mean that that is wrong. So you consider people's cultural background and then there are also religious concerns. Providing or arranging for adequate food and water, appropriate accommodation and clothing, protection for baggage and other possessions, appropriate medical treatment. So when you are quarantining somebody, these are the things that you have to make sure that they are available. You have to give the person food, water, then appropriate accommodation when they will feel comfortable, then clothing, depending on the area or the country or the state party. You have to give clothing. If it's in a cold country, then you give the person warm clothing. Then protection for baggage and other possessions. Then appropriate medical treatment, means of necessary communication, if possible. So if you are to quarantine people, these are the things that you have to do for them. In this COVID, the last aircraft that they quarantine them, you realize you know the hotels that they put them. The 5-star hotels in Ghana, that's where they put them. And they footed, the government footed all their bills, their eating and everything. And supposing this were to be in a cold country, they have to even give them appropriate clothing. And then you also look at the communication means. If the people does not understand your language, you provide somebody who can understand the person. And then that is how the communication will be. And it should be in the language that the person understands. Other appropriate assistance for travelers who are quarantined, isolated, or subject to medical examination or personal other procedures for public health purposes. So even medical treatment and all that will have to be provided for the person that you quarantine for free. So that is it. And then we'll look at the special provisions for goods, containers, container loading areas. And that is the chapter 4 of the regulation. Goods in transit. Subject to Article 43 or unless authorized by applicable international agreement, goods other than live animals in transit without transshipment shall not be subject to health measures under this regulation or detained for public health purposes. Goods other than live animals. So apart from live animals, anything that travelers are traveling with, the goods that they are traveling with, and then it's in transit. You know, when you are transiting, that is not the country where you are going, but you are passing through that country to your final destination. So if these goods, apart from live animals, are in transit, then there's no need to apply any health measure to those things, because that's where they are is not their final destination. For example, somebody is traveling to US, and then you have to make from Ghana to US, and you have to make a transit in UK, in London. Over there, because the person, London is not the final destination, the UK competent authorities cannot apply health measures to those goods. They should be allowed to pass through and then go. Then container and container loading areas. State parties shall ensure, as far as practicable, that container shippers use international traffic containers that are kept free from sources of infection or contamination. So even the containers that you put things in, they have a specific container. They have requirements that that container should fit. So if you are making any international, sending a transshipment internationally, then you have to put it in an appropriate container. And that container should be free of any infection. And then it should also be free from any reservoir or contamination, and then the vectors, especially when you are packing it. And then state parties shall ensure, as far as practicable, that container loading areas are kept free from sources of infection or contamination. So wherever they are loading containers, the area should also be free of any source of infection. And it's the duty of the country, wherever they are loading, to ensure that the loading areas are free from vectors and the reservoir of infection. And whenever, in the opinion of a state party, the volume of international container traffic is sufficiently large, the competent authority shall take all practical measures consistent with this regulation, including carrying out inspection to assess the sanitary conditions. So wherever they are loading, aside that they are loading a lot of containers, then the competent authorities will have to come in, and then they have to also ensure, they have to assess the place, ensure that the sanitary condition befits whatever they are doing. And then you have to bear in mind that all that they are saying, all that this regulation is about, is preventing international spread of disease and then contamination, and also protecting travelers. Then facilities for inspection and isolation of containers shall, as far as practicable, be available at container loading areas. So wherever they are loading containers, there should be facilities for inspection and isolation. When you are doing the inspection, you don't do it at where they are loading the containers. It has to be at a separate place. And then the facility should be available. And if you suspect any container and then you isolate, it should also be separate from the actual place where you are doing the loading. And then container consignees and consigners shall make every effort to avoid cross-contamination. Yesterday we defined who a consignee and then consigners are. And then we are saying that they have to make sure to avoid cross-contamination. And so in loading the containers, you should avoid cross-contamination, especially when you are using a multiple loading containers. You have to avoid, and this at the seaport and even at the cargo side of the aircraft. In loading, you should avoid cross-contamination. So we'll look at the part 6, and this one talks about health document. Article 35, that is the general rule. What are the rules that guides the health document, the various documents? And then you realize that the various conveyances, they have to do documentation. There are things that they have to fill, form that they have to fill, and other things. Yesterday we talked about the ship sanitation certificates and all those things. So that is what the Article 35 is talking about, the rule guiding this health document. No health document other than those provided for under this regulation or in recommendation issued by WHO shall be required in international traffic. So they are saying that apart from the health document that has been mentioned in this regulation, no other health document will be required for international or from international travelers, provided, however, that this article shall not apply to travelers seeking temporary or permanent residence. So here they are saying that apart from the document that has been spelled out in this regulation, no other health document should be required from travelers. But then, if you are seeking temporary or permanent residence in a state party or a country, then that country may have other health documents that you need to provide, which may not be captured in this regulation. Yes, so that is what the general rule is talking about. Then the competent authority may request travelers to complete contact information forms and questionnaire on the health of travelers, provided they meet the requirements set out in Article 23. Competent authorities may request travelers to complete contact information forms. So when you are traveling, there are forms that you have to complete. Those who have traveled, you realize that when you embark on an aircraft, they give you a form that you fill. And then on that form, they will ask you health questions and other things. If you are traveling in the sea, the same way should happen. And if you are traveling on a bus that is embarking on an international journey or a coach, you need to also provide this information. You fill the form and then they ask you questions that is or pertaining to your health. Then 36, certificates of vaccination or prophylaxis. Vaccines and prophylaxis for travelers administered pursuant to this regulation or to recommendations and certificate relating thereof shall conform to the provision of Annex 6. Yesterday we looked at Annex 6, and then today too we've also seen the Annex 7. So that is what they are saying. All the certificates that is required, it should be the same form as what has been provided for in the Annex 6 and then Annex 7. So if it's something different, then internationally it will not be accepted. And a traveler in possession of a certificate of vaccination or other prophylaxis issued in conformity with Annex 6, and when applicable, Annex 7, shall not be denied entry as a consequence of the disease to which the certificate refers, even if coming from an affected area, unless the competent authority has verifiable indication and or evidence that the vaccination or other prophylaxis was not effective. So, like I said previously, if you have the certificate of vaccination, the yellow card, the country can deny you entry unless they have evidence that the vaccine that was given to you before you started your journey was not effective. That is when they can deny you entry, even though you have the proof, which is the yellow card. Other than that, no country should deny anybody that has or can prove that he has taken the vaccination by the yellow card or evidence by the yellow card that he or she possesses. Then Article 37, Maritime Declaration of Health. So in the aircraft or those who travel by sea, they also have a document that they call, you have to declare your health status on it. And that is what this section is talking about. So the master of the ship, before arrival, you know who the master of the ship is that is the captain. So before arrival at its first port of call in the territory of a state party, shall ascertain the state of health on board, and then except when that state party does not require it, the master shall, on arrival or in advance of the vessel's arrival, if the vessel is so equipped that the state party requires such advance delivery. Complete and deliver to the competent authority for that port a maritime declaration of health, which shall be countersigned by the ship's surgeon. So here, within the ship, anytime the ship is moving, the captain will have to find out, ascertain the state of health of his people, the crew members, the passengers, the goods and everything in his ship. And then he has to fill this maritime declaration of health, which should also be signed by a surgeon. So on the ship going, there should also be a surgeon on it. And then at their next point of call, they have to present this maritime declaration of health to the competent authorities over there. Or they can even send it in advance before they arrive to their next point of call. Then the master of the ship or the ship's surgeon, if one is carried, shall supply any information required by the competent authority as to health condition on board during the international voyage. So after submitting the maritime declaration of health to the competent authority, if they are not satisfied, they can also ask you questions or ascertain the health condition of your conveyance of the ship. And then it's the duty of the master of the ship, the captain, or the surgeons to provide the competent authorities the information that they are requiring for, especially during their international voyage. So in the course of the journey, the health conditions on board the ship, the competent authorities may ask you information on it. And it's the duty of the captain, who is the master of the ship, or the surgeon, to provide this information to the competent authorities. Then the maritime declaration of health shall conform to the model. So when you look at Annex A, Annex A has a sample of how the maritime declaration of health is. So when you get the international health regulation, you go to Annex 8 and then you have a sample of the maritime declaration of health. A state party may decide, A, to dispense with the submission of the maritime declaration of health by all arriving ships. So a state party can say that every ship that is arriving in my territory, or a country can say that every ship that is coming into my territory, you have to let me see your maritime declaration of health. You have to show that form that you have filled. So every country has the right to demand this document, and to also require the submission of the maritime declaration of health under recommendations concerning ships arriving from an affected area, or to require it from ships which might otherwise carry sources of infection. So they can say that every ship coming into the country, you have to show the maritime declaration of health. Or they can also decide that they will require it from only ships coming from an affected area, or any ship that is they suspect that it's carrying any sources of infection. So this one is prerogative of the state parties, and then they can decide which condition that is applicable. And then the state parties shall inform shipping operators or their agents of this requirement. So the shipping operators needs to know. If you are a shipping agent, you need to know this requirement, that wherever you are going, you have to show the maritime declaration of health document. Then the health part of the aircraft declaration. So within the aircraft too, they also have a document that they need to fill. And that document tells the health status of people within the aircraft. The pilot in command of an aircraft, or the pilot's agent in flight or upon landing at the first airport in the territory of the state party, shall, to the best of his or her ability, except when the state party does not require it, complete and deliver to the competent authority for that airport the health part of the aircraft general declaration. So it's a duty of the pilot or the agent to also fill the aircraft declaration on health. And then they have to also submit it to their first point of call. Wherever they are going, their destination, they have to give this document, the field document, to the competent authorities there. And this form should be the same as what has been specified in Annex 9 of the regulation, the International Health Regulation. And then the pilot in command of an aircraft or the pilot's agent shall supply any information required by the state party as to health conditions on board during an international journey. The pilot in command of an aircraft or the pilot agent shall supply. So it's a duty of the pilot to give information concerning the condition of health of the conveyance or of the plane to the competent authorities. So wherever they ask of or they ascertain the health status of the flight, is the duty of the pilot to also provide. So that is why people fill forms, health forms whenever they are traveling. And then the pilots also need to fill this form and give it to the competent authorities at their destination, point of destination. Then the state party may decide to dispense with the submission of, so the same condition that applies for the Maritime Declaration of Health also applies for the Aircraft General Health Declaration. The Annex 9 looks like, so this is the general, the health part of the Aircraft General Declaration. You have, it says that the number of persons on board with illness, other than air sickness. You know, there are people when they sit in the aircraft or they are traveling, within that the movement of the plane and all that will make them vomit, which makes them sick. That is not what they are saying. So apart from this air sickness or the effect of accident, maybe you may have accident in the course of the journey. That is not what they are talking about. But you apart from this, you also need to know. So apart from the air sicknesses and accidents and all that, they have to indicate the number of people being sick on the aircraft, as well as those cases of illness disembarked during the flight. So they indicate those who were sick. You have to indicate the number. And then any other condition on board which may lead to the spread of disease. Apart from this, do you have any other condition on board that may spread internationally? All these things will have to be indicated. Then details of each disinfection. If you have done any disinfection or treated any sanitary condition, then you also need to put it. So as I was saying, so they have to fill this form. And then this part, you have to detail the disinfection or sanitary treatment that you have taken. And then you also indicate the place, which part did you disinfect, the date, the time, and then the method of disinfection or treatment that you use during the flight. And if no disinfecting has been carried out during the flight, you give details of most recent disinfection or disinfecting that you did. And then it has to also be signed. Any crew member concerned. So it has to be the pilot or any member that has been earmarked to do that. You have to do it. So that was the Annex 9. So we'll look at Article 39, Ship Sanitation Certificate. Ship Sanitation Control Exemption Certificate and Ship Sanitation Control Certificate shall be valid for a maximum period of 6 months. We've been talking about this Ship Sanitation Certificate. We said that within the ship, there are 2 certificates that can be issued to the captain, depending on the findings of the inspection that the competent authorities carried out. So here they are saying that the extension, the validity of the ship sanitation certificate is for 6 months, and this period may be extended by 1 month if the inspection or control measures required cannot be accomplished at the port. So we said, based on the findings of the inspection of the ship, the captain may be given either of these certificates. So supposing that there are adverse results within, after the inspection, they find any compromising results, then that certificate that will be given or issued will have to be extended if there's the need. And then their extension should not be more than 6 months. It shouldn't be more than 6 months. And after the 6 months, they realize that still you cannot institute measures to get rid of contamination or infection or whatever adverse effect that was found on board, then they can also extend it for another 1 month. So that is what they are saying. If a valid ship sanitation control exemption certificate or ship sanitation control certificate is not produced, or evidence of a public health risk is found on board a ship, that the state party may proceed as provided in paragraph 1 of Article 27. We realize that we talked about what we said about Article 27. If a ship don't have a valid sanitation control exemption certificate, then that condition in an Article 27 will be applicable in this case. And especially when there's also evidence of public health risk on board the ship, then you will apply first paragraph of the Article 27 in full. Then the certificate referred to in this article shall conform to the model in Annex 3. So the Annex 3 talks about the ship sanitation control certificate and then the ship sanitation exemption certificate. And whenever applicable, control measures shall be carried out when the ship and then the holds are empty. In the case of a ship in ballast. So we talked about yesterday, we said that you apply the health measures when the ship is empty, when the holds are empty, so that you avoid injury and discomfort to persons, the environment, and also the goods. And they shall be carried out before loading. It's appropriate that you carried out the inspection or the health measures are applied before you load the ship, because it has to be empty. And then you also need to avoid discomfort or injury to persons and then goods on board the ship. And when control measures are required and have been satisfactorily completed, the competent authority shall issue a ship sanitation control certificate, noting the evidence found and then the control measures taken. So there are 2 certificates here, but they are saying that when control measures are required and have been satisfactorily completed, the competent authority shall issue ship sanitation control certificate. So in issuing the 2 certificates, the exemption certificate is issued. You issue the exemption certificate when everything is clear. And then you issue the control certificate when there's the need for you to apply health measures or do a decontamination or disinfect a ship. So here they are saying that when the control measures are required and have been satisfactorily completed, the competent authorities are issued the ship sanitation control certificate, noting the evidence found and then the control measures taken. So on the ship sanitation control certificate, there are portions that you indicate after the inspection. You indicate the evidence that you find, and then the control measures, the necessary control measures that you apply. And you will get this in the Annex 3 of the regulation. The competent authority may issue a ship sanitation control exemption certificate at any point specified under Article 20 if it is satisfied that the ship is free of infection and then contamination. So you should note when to issue either of the certificates. You issue the control certificate when there is an adverse finding, and then you also issue the exemption certificate when the ship is free of any sources of infection or contamination, including vectors. And such a certificate shall normally be issued only if the inspection of the ship has been carried out. When the ship and holds are empty, or when they contain only ballast or other materials of such a nature or so disposed as to make a thorough inspection of the holds. So you only issue the certificate when you have done a thorough inspection. And then the thorough inspection should be done when the ship is empty or the holds are empty. There's space where you can see whatever you are looking at for. And if the conditions under which control measures are carried out are such that, in the opinion of the competent authority for the port where the operation was performed, a satisfactory result cannot be obtained, the competent authority shall make a note to that effect on the ship sanitation control certificate. So when they are not satisfied of the condition of the ship, the competent authority is not satisfied with the condition of the ship, they have to note it on the sanitation control certificate. So we'll look at part 7, and that talks about the charges of all these services that we are mentioning. Do they attract any charge? So we'll look at that. And then we'll look at charges for health measures regarding travelers. Except for travelers seeking temporary or permanent residence, and subject to paragraph 2 of this article, no charge shall be made by a state party pursuant to this regulation for the following measures for the protection of public health risks. So you realize that apart from those who want to seek permanent residence, if you want to come and stay in somebody's country permanently or temporarily, you have to go through certain health measures. And that one, the country, they have charges and they have to charge you. But if it's the services that this regulation provides for, they are saying that no country should charge any traveler for all the services that has been mentioned in this regulation. The first one is any medical examination provided for in this regulation, or any supplementary examination. So if for protection of public health, if it's for protection of public health, and then that services has been applied or has been mentioned in this regulation, all this medical examination, you are not supposed to pay. So in this COVID era, all those that they are testing their blood and all those things, the patient or the suspect themselves are not paying anything. They are not supposed to pay anything. But if you are seeking for permanent or temporary residence in a country or state party, that one, if you are to go through any medical examination, you have to pay. Any vaccination or other prophylaxis provided to a traveler on arrival, that is not a published requirement, or is a requirement published less than 10 days prior to the provision of the vaccination or other prophylaxis. Appropriate isolation or quarantine requirements of travelers. So all these services is supposed to be free for travelers. Any certificate issued to the traveler specifying the measures applied and then the date of application, or any health measure applied to baggage accompanying the traveler. So any health measure they apply to the goods that you are traveling with, your baggage, has to be free. But if you are seeking temporary or permanent residence, that one, it will not be free. State parties may charge for health measures other than those referred to in paragraph 1 of this article, including those primarily for the benefits of the traveler. So aside these services that we mentioned, or that has been mentioned in the regulation, the state parties have other charges, or they have to charge you for other services that they render to you. Yes. And then where charges are made for applying such health measures to travelers under this regulation, there shall be in each state party only one tariff or such charges, and every charge shall conform to the tariff. So if by any chance you are supposed to pay for the services that has been mentioned in this regulation, the charge should be the same across board. It should be the same for every country. So supposing I'm in Nigeria, I should pay the same thing as somebody in Ghana. And then, so you look at the exchange equivalence. It should not be, the charges should not be different. It should be the same. So if it is $100, it should be $100 across board. And then not exceed the actual cost of the service rendered. Nobody is supposed to charge more than what has been specified in the annex or in the regulation, and be levied without distinction as to the nationality, domicile, or residence of the traveler concerned. So in even applying the charges, you should not discriminate. You don't need to look at my color, and then you look at somebody, I am dark, the other person is white. So you will charge the dark person more than the white person. No. They are saying that it should be the same, irrespective of nationality. And then domicile is where the person stays, or residence of a traveler concerned. It should be across board, and it should be the same for everybody. And then the tariffs and any amendment shall be published at least 10 days in advance of any levy that needs to be taken. So that if there's the need to pay for the services, the charges will have to be published, and it should be published 10 days before the actual implementation. And nothing in this regulation shall preclude state parties from seeking reimbursement for expenses incurred in providing the health measures. So the countries or the state parties can request for reimbursement from WHO on the cost that they incurred on travelers by providing the services that has been spelled out in this regulation. And this charge can also be taken from conveyance operators or owners with regard to their employees. So those conveyance operators, the state party can request for the reimbursement from them if the services will have to be done for their employees, or from applicable insurance sources. At times when you are traveling, the tickets that you pay for, they are inclusive insurance and other things. So some of these goes to defray the costs for the services that they provide for you, provided the services are mentioned in the regulation. Then under no circumstance shall travelers or conveyance operators be denied the ability to depart from the territory or state party pending payment of the charges. And I think this side is clear. No state party can deny we can't prevent conveyance and then travelers from leaving or departing because they have not paid for the charges that has to do with the services that you provided. So that is what this section is talking about. And then we'll look at charges for baggage, cargo, containers, conveyance, goods, or postal parcels. And where charges are made for applying health measures to baggage, cargo, containers, and conveyances, there shall be in each state party only one tariff for such charges. So it's the same thing that is applicable, with a condition that is applied for charges for rendering services to the travelers. The same thing applies to the baggage and then the cargo and other things. the charge should be the same across board, and it should not exceed the actual services, and be levied without distinction as to the nationality, the flag. The flag signifies where especially in the ship, where the ship is going or coming from, or the country that owns the ship. So that is, in the ship, they use the flag to indicate where the ship is coming from or ownership of the ship. So they are saying that the levy, it should be free of distinction. You cannot discriminate. Same across board, irrespective of the nationality, the flag, the registry, or ownership of the baggage, cargo, and then other things. Then in particular, there shall be no distinction made between national and foreign baggage, cargo, containers, conveyances, or postal parcels. So you can't discriminate or you make distinction between national, cargo, or foreign baggage. The same charge, the same treatment across board. And then the tariffs and any amendment shall be published the same way at least 10 days in advance of the implementation. Then we look at general provisions. What are the general provisions of the regulation? And that is in Part 8 of the regulation. And it has to do with the implementation of some of the health measures. Health measures taken pursuant to this regulation shall be initiated and completed without delay and applied in transparent and non-discriminatory manner. I think with this one, we've said it already. All the health measures has to be applied without any delay. And then it should also be transparent with non-discriminatory manner. You can't say that this good is coming from Africa, so it has to be treated differently. Or this is from China, it has to be treated differently. The same treatment, the same conditions should be applied. Then the additional health measure. This regulation shall not preclude state parties from implementing health measures in accordance with their relevant national law and obligations under international law in response to specific public health risk or public health emergencies of international concern. Apart from the health measures that has been specified in this regulation, every state party or country also has the right to also apply their other health measures if they think that will also achieve the same purpose of preventing international emergencies, public health emergencies, and that also has international concern. They can also do that. So that is it. And then they have to make sure that these additional health measures will achieve the same or greater level of health protection. So if you are applying other health measures, aside the one that WHO has come about, you have to make sure that it's going to achieve a greater or the same level of protection as the one that WHO has recommended. If not, then there's no need for a country to apply the health measures. And then you also look at the prohibition, and then these prohibited issues are specified in this following articles and then the paragraphs. So when you go there, especially Article 25, 26, then you understand what we are talking about here. And then provided such measures are otherwise consistent with this regulation, we are saying that in applying the additional health measures, you are looking at whether your additional health measures will achieve greater or same level of protection. And then there's no prohibition also there. And then you also need to make sure that it's also consistent with the regulation. And such measures shall not be more restrictive of international traffic and not more invasive or intrusive to persons than reasonably available. You have to make sure that the measures is not going to restrict international movement or traffic. And then it's also not going to be more invasive or intrusive. It's not going to cause danger to persons, and then you have to make sure that everything that you are doing, you are protecting people. It's going to also have some level of health protection. You should not go aside in applying the health measures. The country should not go aside these provisions that has been specified in the regulation. Then, in determining whether to implement the health measures referred to in paragraph 1 of this article, or additional health measures under the paragraph 2 of these articles, state parties shall base their determination upon 1, the scientific principles. So in applying the health measures, you don't just do it anyhow. It has to be guided, and then there's a guideline to follow. So in applying even the health measure that has been specified by this regulation or WHO, and then the additional health measures, you have to determine, you look at scientific principles. These are the criteria for applying the health measures. So in determining which measures that you have to apply, you need to be guided by this. First, you look at the scientific principles. What are the scientific principles guiding the health measure that you want to apply? And then you also look at the available scientific evidence. What are the evidence, especially when it comes to the efficacy or efficiency of the health measures that you are applying? What are the evidence, scientific evidence of the risk to human health? The condition, whatever is happening, what is the evidence of the risk to human health? Or where such evidence is insufficient, where the evidence is not enough, then the available information including from WHO and other relevant intergovernmental organizations and international bodies. So you are not just applying the health measures. You need to be guided by this. You look at the scientific principle, the available scientific evidence of risk to human health. And then if you don't have enough evidence, then you look at the available information, including the one from WHO and other relevant intergovernmental organization. Then you also look at any available specific guidance or advice from WHO. Then the state party implementing additional health measures referred to in paragraph 1 of this article, which significantly interfere with international traffic, shall provide to WHO the public health rationale. So if you are applying additional health measures and it's going to interfere with international traffic or travel, then you need to justify, you need to let WHO, give WHO the rationale, and then the relevant scientific information for the health measures that you want to apply. And WHO shall share this information with other state parties and shall share information regarding the health measures that you implemented. They will let other state parties be in the know. And then for the purpose of this article, significant interference generally means refusal of entry or departure of international travels. So the previous section, we are saying that additional health measures that you are applying, if it's going to interfere with traffic significantly, then you have to give rationale to WHO. So this section is defining what is significant interference. And it means that the significant interference means that refusal of entry or departure of international traveler, baggage, cargo, containers, conveyances, goods, and then the like. So all these are significantly, you are interfering with people's travel or international travel, and then traffic. If you refuse somebody entry or you refuse the departure of people, then you are interfering with international travels, and to WHO and to this regulation is a significant interference. Not just human beings, the cargo, the baggage, the containers, and all that. And then the like, or they are delayed for more than 24 hours. So in this COVID, we realize that people travel and the lockdown ban caught up with them, so they can't even come. So we have interfered, the condition has interfered significantly with their international travel. Or even if you delay somebody for more than 24 hours, then it means that you have also interfered with the person's travel significantly. Then after assessing information provided pursuant to paragraph 3 and 5 of this article, and other relevant information, WHO may request the state party concerned and reconsider the applicable application of the measures. So even when you give the rationale to WHO, they can also ask you to reconsider the application of these additional health measures, especially when it has to interfere significantly with trade and then traffic, international traffic. Then a state party implementing additional health measures referred to in paragraph 1 and 2 of this article that significantly interfere with international traffic shall inform WHO within 48 hours of implementation of such measures, and then their health rationale, unless these are covered by temporary or standing recommendation. So you have to let WHO know, and in informing WHO and giving the rationale, all these things will have to be done within 24 hours of implementing that additional health measures. Yes. And then the state party implementing a health measure pursuant to paragraph 1 or 2 of this article shall within 3 months review such a measure, taking into account the advice of WHO and then the certificate and then criteria in paragraph 2 of this article. So you can also review, they can also review the health measures, the additional health measures that you are implementing. And then this will have to be done within certain time frame. And then it has to also be based on the advice of WHO. Yes, and then the time frame is 3 months. The time frame is 3 months. And then it has to also be based on the advice of WHO. And then also the criteria that has been set in this article, especially the scientific principles and the available scientific evidence. Then without prejudice to its rights under Article 56, any state party impacted by a measure taken pursuant to paragraph 1 or 2 of this article may request the state party implementing such measures to consult with it. So in applying the health measure, if it's going to affect another state party or country, that state party can also request wherever the measures are being applied, will have also request or consult with him to see if they can reconsider their decision. Then the purpose of such consultation is to clarify the scientific information, public health rationale underlying the measures, and to find a mutually acceptable solution. So the purpose or the rationale for the consultation with the state party is to clarify the scientific information, and then the public health rationale underlying the measures, and then to find a mutually acceptable solution to that. The provision of this article may apply to implementation of measures concerning travelers taking part in mass congregation. Those who go for pilgrimage and all those things, that is a mass congregation. And then this article is rather applicable to them. That is where the additional health measures and other things can be applied.